So what we're doing here is I want to interview as many people in the church as we can to find out what they were like before they met Jesus, what was it like when they met Jesus, what changed after, and what's God telling them today. So we get to talk to the man himself and hear a little bit about that. I know you grew up in the church, in a pastor's family, so maybe it's different than most people watching this, but what was it like before he was like your personal, like you like surrendered to him kind of thing? It wasn't just I go to church, you know.
Sometimes I look at my own story and I wonder, I'm not a good example of the way, I don't know, maybe everyone thinks that. I tell you, one cool thing is how many pastors' kids and missionaries' kids we actually have in our church, and I wonder if it's because I have a camaraderie with them, because there's definitely a completely different feel, completely different story. And sometimes I used to be jealous of people where you would hear their story of, I had this terrible background and this terrible upbringing, then I met Christ and everything changed. And I'm like, well, that's not my story. And I used to think it was boring until someone had said to me years ago, don't envy my story, because you're like a vase, or a vase as you would say in America, right? You're like a vase. And my vase was smashed on the ground and it's been glued together.
Sure.
But you can still see the cracks. You never had to go through the cracking. So you think that you're jealous of my story, but actually I'm jealous of your story, that you didn't have to go through all this smashing in my life. And I'm like, oh, that was very humbling to hear that. But I had probably several different moments in my life. The first one was, I can vividly remember, was when I was about 5 years old. My father was a pastor and he brought all these churches together and did this huge camp thing. And I was in the meeting and I was really just moved by the whole meeting. And then one of the elders came up to me and said, have you ever given your life to Christ? And I'm like, no! It's just like burst into tears, right? First time that someone had ever asked me about making a decision. I think that's really important, because, and it's not that theologically that, you know, you have to get saved, and if you're not saved when you're a child, that's it, you're going to hell. No, I actually believe a child is under the covering of their parents. But someone gave me the honor of asking me what I wanted, and if I wanted to choose it, and that was significant for me. And did I get saved that day? I don't know, but I made a decision that day, and that was significant. So I think there's three moments in your life. One is when you're a child, the second one is when you're a teenage, and the third one is when you're an adult, right? So your teenage years is when you start finding your ground of what you want to do and what you don't want to do. But sometimes your teenage years is also based on you rejecting something else, like rejecting your parents' way or rejecting what your teachers are telling you to do. And I think that your teenage years can be a struggle with that. And I honestly got to the place in my teenage years, I said, I will never be a pastor. I don't mind being a Christian, don't mind following God, but I'll never be a pastor. I fought God on it. But I felt that urge inside of myself to say, no, follow me, follow me. And so that was the second time in my life when I said, okay, God, I'll follow you. I'll do what you tell me to do. But I didn't realize he was going to tell me to become a pastor. And then the third time was when I was an adult, and I finally gave in to saying, yes, God, I'll follow you. So you're saying, when did you give your life to Christ? Well, actually I gave it multiple times.
I was actually having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they had the same struggle, like when did I? And I was like, I think you mentioned this in a talk recently about baptism, that it's a continual thing. It's like that's the Christian life, is every day surrendering to him every day. So I like the 5-year-old thing, 'cause I think that's really cool. Like it's a moment that's like, you see kids grow up in the church, and it's so easy to be like, oh, they're here, their parents are Christians, they must already be, but like to talk to them about it, and like could really make an impact and bring them closer to Jesus. It's really cool. And then it sounds like you're giving into your calling, giving into whatever he wants. There's always these levels of surrender and sanctification and everything else that like happens. It's really neat.
Well, and something I'd said this past weekend was there's a huge issue in the church of young people going into adulthood and then losing their faith. But I don't know that they had their faith in the first place. I'm not a once saved, always saved type of person, like, oh, well, they never really were saved, that type of thing. I think it's because what happens is the construct of their faith is based on a very small amount of faith that they had, built in a tower of cultural Christianity, because their parents told them to be good, their community told them you couldn't listen to this music, and you couldn't dress this way, and you couldn't do this, and you couldn't believe that. So it's actually a cultural Christianity. They're holding to the beliefs of what someone else has told them to believe.
Right.
But they've not actually owned it. They've not decided, this is for me, belongs to me. And that's a massive difference between cultural Christianity and personal faith.
So did you have a moment where you were like, this is mine, it's not just my dad's, not just the pastor, but like, this is my thing now, I'm owning this? When do you remember feeling that for the first time, or thinking that for the first time?
Again, it's like a series of different things. I think definitely when I was a teenager, I decided, this is really nerdy. I decided to start getting into, me and my friend started listening to tapes from a guy called 𝗦𝘂𝗣𝗃, and we were like, our brains were blown.
When you say tapes, you mean like...
Oh my gosh, look. Wait, I have some tapes. Look, children.
We'll edit this. No, here we go.
This is old school. Look, this is what an old school tape looks like. Look, literally, we used to get tapes in the mail, me and my friend, and when we were about 14 years old, maybe 12 years old, we got tapes in the mail. We ordered them in the mail.
Why do you still have that? There's nothing you can play it on.
No, not true. Not true. Look,
this is the way.
I still have an old school Walkman.
No!
Yes.
What? It clicks.
Yeah.
Things. You know this is the real deal because it's a sports Walkman, and
it's going to be worth a lot of money someday.
It clicks. It's going to be worth maybe as much as you bought it for.
I have some old school stuff, right? So I remember us. We would order the tapes because this guy had come to my dad's church, and his level of teaching was so phenomenal. It melted our brains, and it made it have an inspiration for the scriptures. So we kind of order these tapes like once a month, and we get one, then we get it and go, hey, I got a tape, and then we'd rush around to each other's house, and then we just lie on our beds listening to what he had to say, and then we'd stop it and go, oh my gosh, I never heard this before, because he had a depth of teaching. So I started to own my own faith in that I was finding out things myself about scriptures, cool. Right?
Yeah.
But scripture became exciting to me because I started to understand it. There are so many people that listen to scripture and they'll go, oh, that's nice, and then they walk away, forget about it, because they never understood it.
Yeah.
But they didn't find a passion for it. Oh my gosh, can you believe that this is real, that this is true? And it melted my brain, and I think that pushed me into finally giving into God. Okay, I'll go to Bible college, even though I didn't want to go to Bible college. I didn't want to do this stuff, and I think it's because I didn't want to get sucked into religion. I didn't want to get sucked into being told what to believe. I wanted to find out what it was, and that's where I think my passion for studying scripture really came about. So if it wasn't 𝗦𝘂𝗪𝗶, he just died last year. Really sad. He was in his 90s, and this guy...
Is he still teaching and stuff in his 90s?
Yeah,
Wow.
The guy was phenomenal. And I still listen to his stuff, even today. It's really amazing. But yeah, so that was a significant moment when I said, what was your question again?
When did you own it? Yeah.
Oh, that was a significant moment when I started to own it.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, so last big question, kind of related, kind of not, but like, what's God telling you now as you're like years later out of your, and you're leading our church now? What's something God's telling you now?
It seems like there's a lot of stuff, right? Well,
just one thing. Yeah, just one thing. You have to tell us all the depths of your brain and melt our brains, but just...
Okay. So last year was a massive, significant change. I felt God had been preparing me for a long time, saying major change is going to come. And so I think what happened...
Could you tell me what it is?
He said, what's going to happen? I didn't. You just have to be ready, right? But what happened last year was not a shock to me. It was painful for me with all the upheaval of culture, the racism thing that came to the surface, the Me Too thing, even the churches have changed significantly. The statistics that are coming out about how churches have changed, they're not going to go back to the way they were. Pastors are leaving the ministry. People are leaving the faith. All these things. It's all bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news, right? But I don't think it is. I think it's phenomenal news. Because when God decides he's going to shake up everything, it's because he's getting rid of the junk and he's making us more perfect, more pure for the sake of his return. So for me, I'm excited about all the challenges. And I'm not just saying that because that's what you need to hear, like, oh, the pastor has to say that. No, I truly am. I am thrilled about it. I am reading and studying like nothing on earth, because I'm trying to look for all the signs of what do we need to do, how do we need to respond in order to be on the forefront of being able to collecting, because we're seeing people's lives changed. We're seeing new people come to faith. We're seeing new opportunities to do things like we've never done before. We don't look like a normal church anymore.
Right.
Even though on the surface maybe we do, but we're not actually a normal church anymore. The things that are happening, I am super, super excited, because I think they're just a small insight of what's to come. So I'm buzzed. Get around me, ask me questions, I'll ask you questions, and we'll be excited together about what's going to happen.
Love it. Guys, this is What's Your Story? He's Pastor Peter Brunton. I'm Ryan McKenzie. We'll see you later.